Masechet Menaḥot Daf Membet Tenor Banan Sisit and Sisit Ela Anaf Vechen Hu Omer Veikacheni Sisit Roshi. A Braita teaches that the word Sisit means the strings, the part of the Sisit that extends past the knots. And how do you know that? Because it says in Sefer Yechezkel, when Yechezkel is brought helicoptered over in a prophecy to Yerushalayim to see what's happening there, it says, I was taken by the lock of my head. So it's a lock of hair that you can grab onto and pull the person up. And so similarly, it's talking about the loose strings that extend past the knot. And you have to have that. Ve'amar Abaye, ve'sarich lefroda ki susita de'arma'eh. Abaye says that one needs to separate all of those strings like the lock of the Arameans. They're probably referring to Romans that had some braided hair. The beginning of the hair would be braided, and then they will leave the rest of the hair loose. But it has to be all loose and not all knotted together. So you have to have the knotted part, and then after that you have to have strings that are separated from each other in order to fulfill sisit. Tenor Banan, hitil al hakeren o al hagadil keshera. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer pasul Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov posel bishtehem. Another Braita teaches that if one ties or attaches the sisit strings all the way to the corner or to the hem, then that is kosher. That's not what we do. We make a hole in the middle and then put the strings through the hole. But what if instead of that, you attached it directly to the corner, or you tied it right onto the hem on the side of it? So Tanakh Kama says that's okay. That's the corner. That's fine. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says no, it's not good. You have to insert it into a hole that's a little bit far from the edge. Keman azla had amarav gidel amarav. Sisit tzricha shetehen notefet al hakeren. Sheneemar al kanfe begadim. Keman kerebi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Whose opinion will be the following statement of Rav Gidel, a name of Rav, that sisit have to fall, hang onto the corner, since it says on the corners of their garment. Who does this follow? It follows Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Why? What do you mean fall on the corners? So it's going to be like this. If you put it through a hole that's a little bit far from the edge, so then the strings will go to the side, and then just by gravity, if you put it towards the side, it'll stay there, and then it will fall and pass the corner. So that's the proper way that you can fulfill it being on the corner, because otherwise it might not touch the corner at all. So this opinion that says it should fall past the corner like this is not following Tanakh Kama, because Tanakh Kama says that you can put it directly on the corner. You can tie it directly right there on the corner. So therefore, this opinion is following the other, is following the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that you cannot tie it directly on the corner, but rather you put it through a hole that's a little bit away from the corner, and let it fall past the corner. And so that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, v'sarich she'erchik melo kesher gudal. How far should it be from the edge? Rabbi Yochanan says the size of a thumb joint from the edge to the hole where one will put it in. Thumb joint means from the tip of the thumb till the first knuckle. So it should be at least that far from the edge. Now we need both the statement of Rav Papa. Rav Papa said on the previous daf that the fringes should be placed in a hole that's within 3 finger breadths from the edge. So now we're trying to figure out, well, is it 3 finger breadths, or is it the length of the thumb until the first knuckle? Well, we can put both together as follows. See, these measurements are not exactly the same. 3 finger breadths is a little bit more than the size of that thumb length. Now, if we had only the opinion of Rav Papa, I would think that it has to be at most 3 finger breadths from the edge, and don't go any farther. But if you want to get closer to the edge, I might think that you can. You can go all the way very close to the edge. And that's why I need the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yaakov is telling me the minimum that you have to leave. You have to leave at least that much space. So that's why I need Rabbi Yaakov. If I had only the statement of Rabbi Yaakov, then I would think that you have to leave at least a thumb joint from the edge to the hole, and it cannot be any closer, but it can be farther away, as far as you want. I might think there's no maximum length, and that's why I need a papa. So therefore, the hole should be between a thumb length and not more than 3 finger breadths. Ravina v'Rav Sama havu yatbe kamed Rav Asher. We have 2 students, Ravina and Rav Sama. They were sitting before Rav Asher, their teacher. Chazier Rav Sama lekarne de glima de Ravina de satar ubasar memelo kesher gudal. And one of the students, Rav Sama, saw the garment of the other student, Ravina, that the hole was less than a thumb joint from the edge of the garment. And so he said, Amar le la sabar la mo leha de Rabbi Yaakov. And so Ravina told Rav Sama, Master, do you not agree with the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov that you have to have at least a thumb length between the edge and the hole, and yours is less than that? Amar le bishat asiyah itmar. And the Ravina answers, no, that's only when you first make the garment, when you first attach the sisit, then it has to be at least that much. Over time, the hem got rubbed away, and now it's less. It got cut a little. So that's okay. If after some time, it's still attached, it's still in the hole, but it got rubbed away and it's less than a thumb length, then it's okay. And when I first attached it, it was sufficient. Ichsif, Rav Sama was embarrassed because he realized he made a mistake. He accused his friend wrongly, and he didn't know this halacha. And so he's embarrassed, especially because they're in front of their teacher, Rav Asher. Amar le Rav Asher, la titkif lach, had minayhu ketre minan. And Rav Asher gives comforting words to his student, Rav Sameh, and he said, don't be upset. Two of us, one of them is like 2 of us. What do you mean, them and us? Sometimes this means Eretz Yisrael and Bavel. But here, all these sages are from Bavel. So instead, we can understand that it means that Ravina was studied in Pumpedita, and they were very sharp over there. Whereas Rav Asher and Rav Sama were both from Mata Mehasya. And so he's saying, listen, he's saying, I'm with you, me and you. So it's nice of the teacher to put himself with his student, and that way he won't feel embarrassed. He says, listen, we're on the same page. We studied in Mata Mehasya, and therefore, we know a lot, but you don't compare yourself to Ravina, and don't feel bad if you don't know something that he does know because he studied in Pumpedita. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Rameh arba ve'ayif lehu me'af u'me'ayeh lehu beglima ve'abek lehu mebak. Rav Acha bar Yaakov, when he was first inserting the strings into the hole of the garment, he would take 4 strings and he would fold them in half. And then he would make a loop. And then he would attach the loop, insert that into the hole. And then he would take all the strings, the loose ends of the strings, which is 8, because once you fold it, it's doubled. Take the loose ends of the 8 strings and put it through that loop. So that way you make a kind of a slip knot when you first insert it. This had a benefit that when he's inserting the strings, he's not only inserting 4, but he's inserting 8. So again, when you take 4 strings and you fold them over, so now you have 8. So he would take the folded edge and push them through the hole, and so now he has a loop on one side, loose strings on the other side, puts the loose strings through the loop, and then it stays on nicely. Kasabar ba'enan temanya begilima ki hechidileve gedil gedilim bimkom petil. And the reason he did this is because he thought that you need 8. Even when you're first inserting it, you need 8. So that you can fulfill gedil gedilim. We learned that a few dapim ago, that when you say gedil, that means a twisted string, so that means at least 2 by itself, and the fact that it's plural means 4, and so you have 4 strings, but you double them over, and then you need 8. So he wanted to have 8 all together and immediately when he inserted it. So that's how he did it. Rav Yirmiyah midifti ramet temanya di'inhu shitzar. Rav Yirmiyah, in order to have 8, right when he inserted it, actually took 8 separate strings and put them in. So then, once he put them in, and now they're folded, he would end up with 16. But he did not make a loop like Rav Acha Bar Yaakov did. Morbered Ravina Aved Kididan. Morbered, the son of Ravina, does what we do, which is in fact what we still do today. We take only 4 strings and we insert the loose end straight. So when you're inserting them, you're only inserting 4. But that's okay, because once you pull them through, now they're doubled over, and then you end up with 8. And so that's totally fine. Rav Nachman ashkechel Rav Ada barahava Menaḥot v'kam barech la'asot sisit. Amar le, mai sisi shama'na. Hachi amar Rav, sisit en tzricha Berakha. Story about Rav Nachman, he saw that Rav Ada Barahava was attaching strings, sisiot, to a garment. And he was saying a Berakha, Asher Kedusha Besotav Sivanu, Lasot Sisit. And he says, what is I hear you say? I hear sisi, the sound. It sounds like he was whispering the Berakha. He says, what are you doing? What are you saying a Berakha? For tying sisit? Rav says, Sisit does not require a berakha when you're attaching them. You say a berakha when you put it on, but you don't say a berakha when you're attaching them. Kinach nafshe de Rav Huna al Rav Chisda lemirma de Rav Umi amar Rav Sisit and sarich berakha. And now we have a question about this tradition that we just mentioned in that story, that when Rav Huna died, Rav Chisda got up to teach a lesson, and he said, the Rav says 2 statements that seem to contradict each other. So he says, did Rav really say that when you attach sisit, you don't need a berakha? Va'amar Rav Yehuda, amar Rav, minayin sisit begoy shehi pesula, shenemar daber el bnei Yisrael, v'asu lehem sisit, bnei Yisrael ya'asu, v'lo hagoyim ya'asu. After Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav, how do you know that sisit cannot be made by a non-Jew? If a non-Jew ties sisit, it's invalid, because the Torah says, go speak to Bnei Israel, and they should make sisit. Bnei Israel can make sisit, a non-Jew cannot make sisit. No, so these are contradictory. But the Gemara asks, "Vaha mai rumya?" Where's the contradiction? I don't see it. Okay, on the one hand, Rav said that you don't have to say a berakha when you make sisit. He also says non-Jews cannot make sisit. Okay, those don't seem contradictory. Just from the face of it, what does that one have to do with the other? Amar Rav Yosef, Kasaba Rav Chisda, Kol misvah shekeshera begoy, b'Yisrael en sarich levarech. Kol misvah shepesula begoy, b'Yisrael sarich levarech. And the answer is, Rav Yosef explained that according to Rav Chisda, who was giving this lecture in the first place, Rav Chisda was giving it, he thinks that any mitzvah that a non-Jew can do, if a Jew does it, he does not say a blessing. Whereas any mitzvah that a non-Jew cannot do, then if a Jew does it, he says a blessing. Because after all, you're saying, Asher Kiddeshanu, Hashem, you sanctified us with your commandments, and you commanded us to do this. So you can only say that berakha if it's something that only a Jew can do and a non-Jew cannot do. But if it's something that a non-Jew can do, then the Jew would not say a berakha. And therefore, these are contradictory. On the one hand, he said that sisit, you don't say a berakha when you tie sisit. Well, if you don't say a berakha, that means a non-Jew can do it. But then he says a non-Jew cannot tie sisit. Well, if a non-Jew cannot tie sisit, then you should be able to say a berakha. But now we challenge this rule of Rav Chisda, and we ask, Uchlalahu, is that really a principle? V'hare milah dichshera begoy detanya, ir she'en barofe Yisrael, v'yesh barofe aramai, v'rofe kuti, yamul aramai, v'al yamul kuti, diber Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda omer kuti ve'lo aramai. Look at the example of Brit Milah, which a non-Jew can perform a Brit Milah on a Jew. As we see in the following Braita, if there's a city where there's no Jewish doctor who knows how to do a Brit Milah, but there is a non-Jewish doctor called Aramean, just means a non-Jew, and there's also a Samaritan who are technically, well, it depends on the machloket, whether when they converted because they were scared of lions, are they actually Jewish or not Jewish? Samaritans, but they keep the laws of the Torah only Chumash, and they do it in their own way. So you can get a Brit Milah, but which one is preferred? according to the Bimeir, let the non-Jew do it and not the Kuti, because the Samaritan, although he's like more Jewish, he does mitzvot of the Torah, but he does it in his own way, and sometimes they're idolaters, and they're going to have in mind something else, so therefore just use the non-Jew. As Yehuda says, no, at least use the Samaritan. He is at least following Torah law. He's closer to Judaism and not the Aramean. Okay, but the point is, even though they're arguing which one is better, they all agree that a non-Jew can perform a Brit Milah. And yet, Ubi Yisrael sarich levarech amar mor hamal omer baruch asher kedushan misotav v'sivanu al hamilah. And yet, a Jew who performs a Brit Milah says a Berakha, Hashem, you commanded us regarding Brit Milah. And so this is going to contradict Rav Chista's rule, because here we have something that a non-Jew can perform, and you said if a non-Jew can perform it, then a Jew does not make a Berakha on it. But here, a Jew does make a Berakha on it. Midi hu ta'ama ela lerav, Rav mifsil pasil. And we answer, Rav Chista's rule was only there to explain Rav. He brought it up to explain the contradiction between the two statements of Rav. So we're working within the opinion of Rav. And Rav himself says that a non-Jew cannot perform Brit Milah. Ditmar, minayin lemilah begoshe pesula, daru bar papa mishmeh de Rav amar, ve'ata et beriti tishmor. Rav says, how do you know that a Brit Milah done by a non-Jew is invalid? Daru Bar Papa says in the name of Rav, because it says, you shall keep my covenant. This is in the paragraph, in the chapter in Bereshit, all about Brit Milah. You shall keep my Berit and your children after you for all generations. So you, Avraham, and your descendants, but not non-Jews. That's one way of learning it. Rabbi Yochanan amar himol himol, hamal yamul. When the pasuk says a double verb, you shall surely circumcise, the double verb is to say, one who is circumcised can circumcise others, but non-Jews who are not commanded in circumcision, they cannot circumcise others. Okay, so that's another derivation, but the same point. And Rav would say that a non-Jew cannot perform Brit Milah on a Jew, and therefore it makes sense that a Jew would say a Berakha. So this actually does fit with the rule that Rav Chista proposed. Okay, let's try another couple of examples. Sukkah mise'aleh tefillin havet teyubta. The example of Sukkah supports Rav Chista's principle, but tefillin is going to be a refutation of it. Let's see each one. Hare sukkah de kishera begoy, detanya, sukkat goyim, sukkat nashim, sukkat behema, sukkat kutiyim. Sukkah mikol makom kishera, wilbad shetehem mesuchechet kehilchata. Braita teaches that a sukkah that's made of a non-Jew, that's made by a non-Jew, is kosher. And you learn that from a Braita that says a sukkah of a non-Jew, a non-Jew made it just to be for shade. He didn't make it for the mitzvah of sukkah. He just made his own sukkah, or a sukkah nashim, a sukkah built by women. Women are not chayavot in the mitzvah of sitting in sukkah, but they can build a sukkah, and that would be a kosher sukkah. Or if it's made for shade, to give shade to animals, or Samaritans, they also have a mitzvah of sukkah. They follow the Pesukim in the Torah, so they made it for their understanding, their mitzvah of Torah. Or a sukkah, and anywhere, it doesn't matter who made it, as long as it fits the criteria of a sukkah, as long as it has the roof that has schach according to the proper halacha, as long as it fits the bill and it's a hut made for shade, then you can use it to fulfill the mitzvah. The point is that a non-Jew can build a sukkah. Ubi Yisrael en sarich levarich detanya haoseh sukkah latzmo omer baruch ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam shehechiyanu v'kiyemanu v'higi'anu lazeman hazeh balesheba omer baruch ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kedushan mitzvotav v'sivanu lesheba sukkah ve'ilu la'asot sukkah lo mevarech. And if a Jew builds a sukkah, he does not make a blessing. So it fits with the rule, with the principle of Rav Chista. A non-Jew can build a sukkah, and therefore a Jew who builds it does not say a Berakha. And we know that a Jew who builds it does not say a Berakha because here this Braita tells us all of the Berachot have to do with building a sukkah. If someone makes a sukkah for himself, he does say Shechianu. Guess fine. Okay, that's Shechianu. But that's not a Berakha, that's not Birkat HaMitzvah. when it comes to actually sit in it, he says that you blessed us to and commanded us to sit in the sukkah. That's when you're going to use the sukkah. But la sot sukkah, when you're building it, there's no beracha of making a sukkah. So sukkah fits in with Rav Chista's principle. Tefillin tiyubte, but tefillin is going to be a rejection of it. Vare tefillin, tefesulot begoy, na tefillin cannot be made by a non-Jew. Detane Rav Chinena bere derava. Mi pashronya. Sefer Torah tefillin umezuzot shekatavan min. Kuti, goy, aibed, isha, vekatan, v'Yisrael mishumad, פסולין, שנאמר וקשרתם וכתבתם. כל שישנו בקשירה, ישנו בכתיבה. כל שאינו בקשירה, אינו בכתיבה. Because we have Rav Chinena, the son of Rava, from Pashronya, said that a Sefer Torah, or Tefillin, or Mezuzah, was written by a heretic, or a Samaritan, or a non-Jew, or a servant, or a woman, or a child, or a Jew who is an apostate. He rejected the mitzvah of tefillin. The tefillin, if any of these people write tefillin, it's no good, because the pasuk says ukshartam, and then next pasuk says uchtavtam, that you write uchtavtam al mezuzot. So anyone who is commanded to bind tefillin upon himself, can also uchtavtam, can do the writing of tefillin, of mezuzot, sefer Torah, all the same. But anyone who is not obligated, or or rejects the obligation of binding of tefillin, cannot write it. And so therefore you see, a non-Jew cannot write tefillin. And how about the Berakha? Ubisrael en sarich levarech. Deshalach Rav Chia bered Rav Huna mishmed Rabbi Yochanan. Al tefillin shel yad omer baruch asher kiddush mitzvotav v'sivanu lehaniach tefillin. Al tefillin shel rosh omer baruch asher kiddush mitzvotav v'sivanu al misvat tefillin. V'lu lasot tefillin lo mevarech. And when a Jew puts on tefillin, when a Jew writes tefillin, creates tefillin, he does not say a berakha. And we know this because Rav Chia, the son of Rav Huna, said named Rabbi Yochanan, he sent the following ruling, and taught that when you put on tefillin shel yad, you say lehaniach tefillin. When you put on tefillin shel rosh, one says al misvat tefillin. But there is no beracha la'asot tefillin when one is writing or making the tefillin. And this is a refutation of Rav Chista's rule, because here a non-Jew cannot make tefillin, so you would expect, according to Rav Chista's rule, that since a non-Jew cannot make them, a Jew should say a berakha on them. And so now we reject Rav Chista's rule. So what is the rule that can explain when we say a berakha on making something and when we don't? Ela lav hainu ta'ama kol mitzvah de'asiyata gemar mitzvah kegon mila af agav dekishra begoy b'Yisrael sarich levarech v'chol mitzvah de'asiyata lav gemar mitzvah kegon tefillin af agav depesulot begoy b'Yisrael eno sarich levarech. So here's the rule: any mitzvah where the creation of the mitzvah is the completion also. For example, Brit Milah, by making a Brit Milah, by doing that cut and creating that sign, that you finished. You completed this mitzvah. You don't have to do anything ever again. And therefore, in that one, even though a non-Jew can do it, not according to that, but according to the opinion that a goy can do it, a Jew would say a blessing, because the doing it is the final act. So then you do say a berakha. Whereas something that the asiyata lav gemar mitzvah, the creation of it is not the end of the mitzvah, like tefillin. Writing the tefillin, making the tefillin is just the beginning of the mitzvah. You don't fulfill the mitzvah until you put it on. And similarly for a sukkah, lulav. Okay, you bought the lulav, you prepared it, you made a sukkah, but you did not fulfill it until you actually use them. In all of these cases, even though a non-Jew cannot perform, at least tefillin, not sukkah, a non-Jew can do, make it. So we're addressing the counter examples. Tefillin, even though a non-Jew cannot do it, because the making of it is not the completion of the mitzvah, a Jew does not say the berakha. So this makes sense. You say a berakha if this action that you're doing completes the mitzvah. You don't say a berakha if this action does not complete this mitzvah. Now that we've rejected Rav Chisda's principle, we can also solve that contradiction that we started with between the two statements of Rav. Rav, on the one hand, says that Sisit cannot be made by a non-Jew. He also says you don't say a Berakha on it. But there's no contradiction here. According to Rav Chisda's principle, it would be a contradiction. Since if a non-Jew cannot make them, then it should be that you do say a Berakha. But now we just rejected that. And whether a non-Jew can do that, can make it or not make it, is not the essential principle. That doesn't decide whether you say Berakha or not. In fact, what decides it is whether the making it is the completion of the mitzvah or not. And here, and when it comes to Sisit, this is not the completion, according to this principle that we just said. Making the Sisit is not the completion, and therefore one would not say a Berakha. Good. So we resolve the contradiction between the two statements of Rav. But now we want to go back and explain the machloket between the sage above who said a Berakha and the one who rebuked him and said, no, we don't say a Berakha according to Rav. Ubesisit beha kamipalge. Mor sabar chobat talitu, mor sabar chobat gabrahu. The sage Ravada Barahava, who when he was tying Sisit, he did say a Berakha. He was of the opinion that the obligation of Sisit is on the garment. Remember we said yesterday, if you have a garment, even if you're not wearing it, even if it's just sitting in a drawer and you're not planning on wearing it anytime soon, if you own it, you have to put sisiyot on it. Since it's a mitzvah of the garment, so as soon as you put on the sisit, then you fulfill the mitzvah of having sisit on that garment. So it makes sense you would say Berakha. Whereas Rav Nachman, in the name of Rav, said, no, you should not say Berakha because they think that it's a mitzvah on the person wearing it. So you can put Sisit on 100 garments and leave them in the drawer, but you didn't fulfill anything because the mitzvah is on the wearing it, on the person. So only when you wear it, then you would say Berakha. But the tying of the Sisit is only a preparation for the mitzvah and is not the completion. Amar le Rab Mordechai le Rab Asher, Atun hachi matnit tula, anan hachi matninan la. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, minayin lesisit begoy shekeshera, sheneemar daber el bnei Yisrael v'asu lahem sisit, yasu lahem acherim. Rab Mordechai told Rav Asher, you taught this law in the way that you did, that according to Rav, if a non-Jew makes sisit, it's invalid, and that we had that whole discussion above. However, we have a different version of the statement, and in our version, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, how do you know that sisit that's made by a non-Jew is kosher? As it says, go tell Bnei Israel, and they should make for them sisit, not for themselves, rather asulahem. So that means that non-Jews can make sisit for others, meaning for Jews. And therefore, if you say that sisiyot can be made by non-Jews for Jews, well then we can accept Rav Chisda's principle, and therefore, since a non-Jew can make it, that would explain why, according to Rav, you would not say a Berakha on it. So this would be an alternative version of the discussion that we just had. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Asa'an min hakosim, min hanimim, min hageradin, pesula, min hasisin, keshera. Rav says that if one ties the sisit, not using separate strings, but using strings that are part of the cloth itself. These are three various types. One's called thorns. It's not actually thorns, but fabric that's sticking out, or the warp, or the woof. Different parts of the fabric that are hanging loose. You cannot use those to tie the strings of sisit. However, from sisin, if it's from a swatch of wool that was spun, even though that was spun just for regular use, not for the sake of the mitzvah, that's okay. The sisin is a separate a bundle of wool, not part of the garment itself. So that you can take that wool and use it. So according to this opinion, you do not have to prepare the threads for the mitzvah of sisit. Ki amrita kamed Shmuel amar af min hasisin pesula ba'ainan teviyah lishma. Rav Yehuda says that's what he learned from Rav. But when he repeated this in front of Shmuel, Shmuel's opinion is that even the swatches of wool, if they were not made for sisit, are not fit to be used. Rather, you need the spinning to be done for the sake of the mitzvah of Sisit. Ketana'eh. These two Amoraim, Rav and Shemuel, parallel a machloket between two Tanaim. Because it says, Sipan Zahav, O shetala lehen or behema teme'ah pesulot. This is regarding tefillin. If someone coated the tefillin with gold or put a patch on them from skin of a non-kosher animal, it's no good. The tefillin have to be made out of leather from a kosher animal, so that's no good. Or behema tehora kesherot, v'afal pi shelo ibedan lishman. However, as long as you use leather from a kosher animal, then the tefillin is kosher, even if that leather was not prepared for the sake of tefillin, so just regular leather, that's okay. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Af or behema tehora pesulot ad she'abedan lishman. However, Rashbag says, even if the leather comes from a kosher animal, you still cannot use it for tefillin unless it was prepared for the sake of tefillin. So that's a parallel machloket. Amar le Abaye, le Rav Shemuel bar Rav Yehuda, ha techelta hechi sab'i tu la. Abaye asked Rav Shemuel bar Rav Yehuda, how do you prepare the techelet? How do you prepare the dye? Amar le, maitinan dam chilazon v'sammanim v'raminan lehu be'yora. We take the blood of the chilazon snail and other herbs, and you put it all in a pot and boil it together. V'shaklina purta be'ata v'ta'aminan lehu be'udra. Now you have a lot of dye, but you should take just a little bit in a separate vessel. You can use an eggshell, and you test it by dyeing a little bit of wool in that to make sure it comes out the right color. And then once you use that dye and that piece of wool to test, you should throw away that eggshell and the dye in it, and you should burn the wad of wool. Why? Because if you were using it only for testing, it cannot be used for sisit. So you want to get rid of that wool, because if you leave it around, someone will say, "Oh, look, it's nice techelet wool. I think I'll use it as to attach to my garment for sisit." But it's no good because it was dyed just for testing, not for the sake of a mitzvah. So it has to be done for the sake of mitzvah. And even the dye, since you took, if you use some dye for testing, then all the dye in that vessel also is no good. And therefore, don't test it in the main vat, but rather just take a little bit in an eggshell and test it with that, and then throw it away. Do not use that dye again. Shema mina telat. We can learn from this 3 laws. Shema mina te'ima pesula, Shema mina deba'ainan tsebi'a lishma, Shema mina te'ima pasla. We learn, number 1, that wool that was used for testing, even though it's nice and blue, still you cannot use that wool for techelet, for the mitzvah. And we also learned that the dyeing has to be for the sake of a mitzvah. If someone dyed it because he wants to make a nice cloak, a nice something else, not for tzitzit, then you cannot use that dye. And you also learn that the dye itself that was used for testing also becomes unfit, and you can't use that dye in that vessel anymore. Hainu te'ima pesula, hainu sebi'a lishma. We ask, the 2 of these things is the same thing, the first 2. When you say if wool was dyed for testing, then it's not good. And then you say it has to be dyed for the sake of the mitzvah. Well, that's the same point. Amar Rav Asher, ma ta'am ka'amar, ma ta'am te'ima pesula, mishun deba'inat sebi'a lishma. Rav Asher says, you're right. In fact, there is only one law, and it's giving an explanation. What's the reason that if you dye wool for testing, that it's unfit to be used for the mitzvah? Because we need the dyeing to be done for the sake of the mitzvah. Ketana'eh. This is a matter of dispute among 2 Tanaim. Te'ima pesula mishum shenemar, kelil techelet Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel. The first opinion says that if you dye something just to test it, you cannot use that techelet for the mitzvah, because the pasuk says entirely of blue means that not only that this is talking about the ephod has to be all blue, but we learn from this that the testing that the coloring, that the dyeing has to be only for the sake of sisit and not for any other use. That's according to Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. So according to that, yes, the dyeing has to be for the sake of the mitzvah and nothing else. Rabbi Yochanan ben Dahavai omer, afilu mar'eh sheni sheba kasher mishum shenemar ushni tolaat. Rabbi Yochanan ben Dahavai disagrees, and he says even the second use of the dye is still kosher because it says ushni tolaat, which literally means scarlet wool, but we're reading it as if it said sheni tolaat. So even if it was used for something else, and now you use it for sisit, that dye is still okay. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.